stuff, just
Oh my goodness.
مناقيش, because I
مناقيش.
got a big cabin and I had an oven in the cabin. So I was making مناقيش and just passing it out and za'atar khubz and all of that
Oops.
stuff, just. All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Inshallah, we're going to be continuing. I know it's been 2 days right now with Surah Al-A'raf. And let's see, let's look at what we were doing. Okay, so we were actually on this piece of it. وقال الملأ من قوم فرعون أتذر موسى وقومه ليفسدوا في الأرض ويذرك وآلهتك. And قال سنقتل أبناءهم ونستحيي نساءهم وإنا فوقهم قاهرون. Last time, well, we did actually go over this piece of it, but we also went a little bit farther. So when basically the elite from the Pharaoh, basically Qawm Fir'aun, they basically had said, "Atadharu." So this is their quote, "Are you going to leave or let Musa and his followers to cause corruption on earth and abandon you?" And we said two words for this one. It's either a verb, and if it is a verb, meaning that would mean and abandon you and worshiping you. So that would make it a verb. Or وَآلِهَتَكَ would basically be a noun, and which would mean your gods, to abandon you and your gods. And certainly that would mean that the elites in Qawm Fir'aun, it's not that they were giving him a suggestion, but they were showing a lot of concern, because certainly every single leader, they would have, every single leader would have basically some elite that would be considered as the advisors, the people that are also benefiting. So there are different levels of benefit. Certainly the king is going to benefit the most. Then you would have the second group in the line. They would be the advisors, etc. They would also be benefiting. And certainly everybody here is concerned about their benefit and not necessarily the society's benefit. So of course, when their benefit is going to be at risk, that's when they either pressure the king that, hey, if you don't take serious measures here, we will be taking then serious measures in either abandoning you or, and that's why when وَيَذَرَكَ وَآلِهَتَكَ, they're basically, you're showing concern that the system might actually be collapsing. That's why they said لِيُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ, that the system might be collapsing. And certainly if the system collapses, what they would be saying is that that would basically risk their interests, and certainly all the things that they were benefiting from might then be at risk. So then certainly the new agenda was سنقتل أبناءهم ونستحيي نساءهم, to kill the children. Or was it to literally kill, or was it to basically take the children and indoctrinate them to being basically having that patriotism for the king himself? In other words, completely exacerbate their identity from them, which is the identity of being part of Musa and the followers of Musa. وَنَسْتَحْيِي نِسَاءَهُم. And we said that separating the children from the mothers and separating the mothers from the husbands, the breadwinners, the husbands, etc., was a tactic, and still is a tactic used in order to control the societies. And we went in some details about that, and we said we need a lot of awakening in helping the Ummah recognize that not because the society is marketing that let's say women working outside of home and all of that, it's not that that that's necessarily wrong. It depends on everybody's circumstances, but certainly be careful from being sucked in, being a business person, or probably sucked into being a breadwinner, and then forget that what you can contribute in having that mental support, that educational support, and certainly at home, which basically is the fitra, is definitely a lot more than what you can contribute in being just a person. Just be careful with that one, but there are different circumstances that may require that some women, they need to go, and certainly we need some women to be doctors, some women to be scientists, and others to be teachers. There's no doubt about that. But we're looking at priorities, and then every single person would basically have a different priority at the time, and certainly the situations and the circumstances may differ from one person to another. So this isn't, one size fits all, but I do recognize that people have different circumstances. Okay. قال سنقتل أبناءهم ونستحيي نساءهم وإنا فوقهم قاهرون. That basically reflects that the key objective that the Pharaoh wanted to do was get to qahr, was get to defeating basically Prophet Musa alayhi salam and his people and the followers. And by defeating them, he basically would then feel that he managed to ensure that they would not be the ones to bring a threat or even change the system that Prophet Musa alayhi salam is revealing, that the centricity around Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what he is, what he's doing da'wah for. قال موسى لقومه استعينوا بالله واصبروا. We said that there's this part within this ayah that it's not telling me, did they actually implement this agenda of killing the children, separating the women, or at least keeping the women alive for labor purposes, or even killing the men, etc.? Did they actually do that or not? But we can see from the response that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had noted that Musa alayhi salam had told his people, Ista'inu billahi wasbiru, seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and be patient. Inna al-arda lillahi yurithuha man yasha. For the earth, for the land, is all for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He would be the one to give it and let it be inherited by whom he wills. Servants. وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. الْعَاقِبَةُ, we said the word al-aqiba is from the root aqiba, which can mean the ending of something, or can mean basically the back of something. We're talking about the ending, the back. We're talking about a trajectory here. So when you look at وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, that's certainly the ones to actually be in this al-aqiba, to be in this level of power, to be in the level of getting that that final victory, would basically be for those that are muttaqin. And we talked about the word taqwa, and we went in details with the word taqwa. Let's see, now we left off at here. قالوا أوذينا من قبل أن تأتينا. So now, is this, the internet connection is slow? Is that true? Are you hearing me breaking? قالوا أوذينا من قبل أن تأتينا. They said, we had been harmed before you had even come to us. We had been harmed before you had even come. What is that supposed to mean? Let's see. So they said that, in other words, it can mean, one, that they were just informing him before you were even born. We're used to all of this. That's what they had been doing. This isn't something new. And therefore, وَمِن بَعْدِ مَا جِئْتَنَا, it can mean that they are saying that this is something that they're used to. And this is just bringing back exactly what he had been doing from before, so nothing new. And it can mean that Prophet Musa alayhi salam's people, that they were somehow complaining, ventilating. He can hear that they're right now feeling this defeat. So then Prophet Musa alayhi salam, how do we know whether they were making a complaint, asking for a way out, or whether they are telling him, we're used to this? In other words, they're already being patient. How do we know? Well, we would know from the response, and the response would give us an idea of what he understood from their words. What did he understand? What did Prophet Musa alayhi salam understand from their words? That's what we want to see. So that's why we've got this point. قَالَ عَسَى رَبُّكُمْ أَن يُهْلِكَ عَدُوَّكُمْ. That's when he said it might happen that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will demolish or defeat your enemy and make you basically the ones to inherit all of this, and see what you would do. Okay, so when you look at the response, that gives you an idea that Prophet Musa alayhi salam was understanding that they were complaining about the case. They were complaining about what was happening. And with this complaint, Prophet Musa alayhi salam comes in to give them this spiritual support by letting them know that asa rabbukum. But here's the trick. The word asa in Arabic, it actually gives me a probability that it might be possible. But when we see the context, this isn't giving me a might be possible to express doubt, but it is actually to express certainty that it is part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in other words, to create a certain pattern, and that pattern, if a certain group of people are patient, whether you're patient in your studies or whether you're patient in your training or whether you're patient in what you're doing, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had promised that all the contribution, all the patience, all the investment, no matter whether you're doing it for dunya purposes or whether you're doing it for akhirah purposes, that it will bring about the fruit that you had worked for. If you worked for Jannah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises that this Jannah will come to you. If you worked for, I don't know, becoming a millionaire, that you worked hard, you did the right planning, you did your let's say your research on how to be a millionaire, you will become a millionaire, and so forth. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises that this is what will happen, whether you work for dunya or where you work for akhirah. But when you look at asa rabbukum an yuhlika aduwakum, lets us know that they were working for one thing. They were hoping for one thing, is that these enemies would basically be destructed. In other words, these enemies would be defeated. They also were concerned about, when it says وَيَسْتَخْلِفَكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, they were also concerned about, well, what will maintain this power? Why are they asking that? Many times, and I want you to look at this one, many times you would hear Muslims talking about khilafah. They would talk about khilafah, and they think that once we get to the khilafah, all our homework is done. Khilafah will solve everything, which is actually not true. Sometimes we tend to bring about solutions and think of solutions in a very surfaced way and not really see the different dimensions of it. And that's one thing, is that just to have this enemy destructed or just to have the khilafah, that does not necessarily bring the solutions to all problems. Just to get married, that doesn't mean that, okay, this is the final thing. That's a beginning for a new position of responsibility, a new position of accountability, a new position to a second stage of the test. Somebody might say, well, you know what? I'm not ready for marriage. Well, same thing. Even if you are, let's say, not married, that's another different stage for the test. Marriage can be a resource to help you overcome another stage of test, which is the fitna out there. All right. So when you look at عَسَى رَبُّكُمْ أَن يُهْلِكَ عَدُوَّكُمْ, you can sense from his words that they were basically here complaining about the system and about the people that are torturing them. So his response is what I would mainly look into in order to see, okay, was this right there, this sentence, when they had said, we were harmed before you had even come, and even, in other words, before you were even born. In other words, this had a long history. Were they complaining, or is this just an informative clause? This isn't just an informative clause, but this is actually coming in with some agony, some sorrow, some sadness that they're complaining to Prophet Musa alayhi salam, and certainly some fear of their future. So even if the Pharaoh was to be defeated, they would not have the capacity, the competence to keep and maintain such authority. And this is very important. It's not enough to just get to the Khilafah. Sometimes it would be really surface. Hey, we just want an Islamic government. Yes, but the question is, are you qualified to maintain it? Are you qualified to make it develop? What are you qualified as an ummah to do? Now, that qualification of what the ummah can do in itself, if they empower themselves to be able to overcome, basically, let's say, enemies or colonization or whatever it is, then that in itself will empower them to maintain it. Don't expect a divine intervention to maintain all the different successes that you had went through. Same thing. Marriage is the beginning of a second stage, but the question is, can you maintain it? Same thing. You graduate after university. You graduate, I don't know what degree, whatever degree you graduated from. That's not the ending. That's certainly at one point that was a goal. And this is the one reason why many might get into depression after getting married or after graduating or probably getting a job. All of a sudden, they just get into a moment of feeling just so sad, so sorrow. They had worked all of this, and then all of a sudden it's not as magnificent as it was pictured. And then they get into depression. Was it as magnificent that they had imagined? So that's why it's important to remember this sentence right there. عَسَى رَبُّكُمْ أَن يُهْلِكَ عَدُوَّكُمْ. It is possible. It is, let's say, inevitable. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet Musa alayhi salam is letting us know that this is inevitable. They will be defeated. But even that is not enough, because you have some homework to do in order to make sure that you would be competent enough to carry on the second stage or the third stage of that responsibility, which is وَيَسْتَخْلِفَكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, and that you will basically be the Khalifa. You will be the one that is the vicegerent, the one to be in such privileges to carry on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted you to do. So that's why he said, فَيَنْظُرَ كَيْفَ تَعْمَلُونَ, and he will see what exactly you will be doing. In other words, with all the opportunities, with all the privileges, with all the different tools that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be giving you. Now, this is very important to keep in mind. Children are a tool. Marriage is a tool. Your education is a tool. And certainly, but some may use the tool against their own selves. They might have, I don't know, a hammer, but then to use the hammer in the wrong place, you're going to destruct destruct that if you're using it in the wrong place. But if you're using it in the right place, then you're basically heading towards the right direction. Having that being said, same thing. A sister may use marriage in the wrong way, may use children in the wrong way, and the list goes on and on. So when we look at وَيَسْتَخْلِفَكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ فَيَنْظُرَ كَيْفَ تَعْمَلُونَ, we could say within, between the lines, that this قَالُوا أُوذِينَا مِنْ قَبْلِ أَنْ تَأْتِينَا وَمِنْ بَعْدِ مَا جِئْتَنَا. In between the lines, we basically read that they were complaining, they were looking for a way out. So the response is, let's see right here what al-Qurtubi said. He said in قَالُوا أُذِينَا مِنْ قَبْلِ أَنْ تَأْتِينَا, meaning when you were born, we basically had to go through, before you were even born, but it was within the time frame, we had to go through all of that. We had to go through all of that torture. We had to go through all of that persecution. And now, وَمِن بَعْدِ مَا جِئْتَنَا, and even after you had come, in other words, we're really living the same series of torture, the same series of persecution, and certainly, let's say, وَقِيلَ الْأَذَى مِنْ قَبْلِ, meaning تَسْخِيرُهُمْ لِبَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ فِي أَعْمَالِهِمْ إِلَى نِصْفِ النَّهَارِ. So when he said, قالوا أُذِينَا مِنْ قَبْلِ, what was the key persecution that they were facing? The key persecution was slavery. That's the key persecution. The second persecution that they were facing is basically taking their children away and taking the wives away. That was the second time. In other words, breaking their families. And this is very important to keep in mind. Breaking the family is a satanic agenda. Encouraging girls and boys to move out of their homes, their families' homes, is a satanic agenda. It is introduced within the society as if it's gaining independence. But that's the same tactic that Shaitan had used in deluding and certainly in convincing Adam alayhi salam that أَوَلَا أَدُلُّكَ عَلَى شَجَرَةِ الْخُلْدِ. Sometimes knowing these agendas and giving the right label in how you would diagnose it, how you would define it, is actually key to making sure Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqan warzuqna ittiba'ah. Ya Allah, show us what is right as right and make us follow it. This is an agenda, this is a satanic agenda to basically separate the people from their families and present it that it was basically because you cannot handle it, because the family is toxic, because the society is not where you wanted to give you that comfort, etc. In Islam, keeping the family intact is an objective that it is to the point that it is part of a spiritual objective, it is part of a mental objective, it is part of the objective in keeping you strong. So even if you may see your father sometimes probably getting into some things that you disapprove of, or your brothers, etc., you want to remember that this is to train you on the social skills on how to contain yourself whenever things may not go and people may not necessarily be in your favor, or at least giving you what you had expected of them. Guess what? You're going to encounter that at school. You're going to encounter that when you marry. You're going to encounter that with your kids. You're going to encounter that at work. The list goes on, and you basically need the training. Don't run away from the training. That's defeat. Running away from the training is in itself defeat. Running away from your parents, that's what is bringing insecurity, not home. Your home is your place for security. Your father is your place for security. You can guarantee that your father is, I'm not talking about those extreme cases where the father is drinking or probably maybe molesting, etc. That's a very extreme case, but I'm talking about those cases where we may differ in how we read this situation, whether it's a healthy home or not. So be careful with the satanic agenda that is attempting and right now making it as if it's a normal thing and encouraging girls, boys to move out of their families' homes. And certainly without us realizing, we are seeing that separation bringing in more cases of mental illness, more cases of depression, more cases of social, let's call them at least incompetence, where they're given all these slogans that it's all about you is what matters, you just treat yourself, etc. And then we end up seeing more people that are entitled, more people that are running away from every certain hardship that they might encounter, and feel that the best way to handle a situation when it becomes pressuring is by running away from it, is by getting somehow away from it and just finding that comfort zone. And guess what? It will come to you regardless. It's all about exercising your social capacity, your spiritual capacity, and certainly socializing with your children and with your brothers, with your siblings, with your parents, is actually giving you better security. In fact, there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ warns of living alone. Why? Because that would mean you would be accompanying shaitan. You would be accompanying shaitan. Let's see. So what else was the Pharaoh doing? So let's see right there. عسى ربكم أن يهلك عدوكم ويستخلفكم في الأرض فينظر كيف تعملون. And see, and basically hold them accountable. Let's see right there what al-Qurtubi had to say. He said that this is basically referring to what the Pharaoh had promised and threatened to do, which basically is to bring them back to harsh labor, get them to do harsh labor. And certainly after the harsh labor, in order for them to get to probably working to feed themselves and probably working to feed their families, is not going to be possible anymore, and certainly end up getting into locked up in starvation, because they're going to be working for the Pharaoh during the day, and then perhaps during evening time they would barely have the energy to work to feed their own families. There is another explanation, is that the Pharaoh was forcing them to pay a certain tax. And just giving it a name, huh? What does the Pharaoh do? Or what might happen? You'll see paying all those high taxes at the expense of the money and what it can be used for serving you. And the people of Qawm Musa alayhi salam, at that moment, they were feeling that their money was getting confiscated, that they're being tortured with their children, and that they're with that high tax that they have to pay, that they ended up basically feeling that they're behind with their basically with the money, with the property, and what they can sustain themselves with. قال عسى ربكم أن يهلك عدوكم. How did they get there? That they were actually paying these high taxes. They got there from وَيَسْتَخْلِفَكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. When Prophet Musa alayhi salam was promising them that they would be the ones to inherit land. They would be the ones to inherit basically all of what was confiscated from them. So when you look at asa, what did he say? He said, asa min Allahi wajib. When you say asa min Allahi wajib, meaning that it is basically incumbent, and in other words, it is imperative, right there, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is promising that He will basically bring an end for the enemy and certainly make them the ones to be in victory. When you say in victory, meaning their wealth, they would be in control of, the system they would be in control of. And certainly when later on, they were basically the ones to be in victory. And in fact, during the time of Prophet Dawood and Sulaiman, they basically had controlled over Palestine. Remember the story of Queen Saba, when she basically had refused to surrender to Prophet Sulaiman and then sent basically Sulaiman some wealth and all of that. And then Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam let them know that I'm not interested in the money, sent that note, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and that they were supposed to surrender to him. And then with a blink of an eye, basically the jinn brought her and her throne together. So that's basically that transformation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us see of Bani Israel, how at one point they were enslaved by the Pharaoh, and later on, يَسْتَخْلِفَكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. Later on, they basically had been the ones to be in power. So فَيَنْظُرَ كَيْفَ تَعْمَلُونَ. What did they do? Well, for Prophet Dawood, اعملوا آل داود شكرا. That's what they had done. At least that's what Prophet Dawood alayhi salam had done. But is that what the Bani Israel had done? That the word later on, inshallah, will be discussed. Let's see right there. قال عسى ربكم أن يهلك عدوكم. He said, استخلفوا في مصر في زمان داود وسليمان. I want you to look at this. So he said that they were actually the ones to be in victory during the days of when they were, well, over Egypt, during the days of Dawood and Sulaiman, Prophet Dawood and Sulaiman. وفتحوا بيت المقدس, and even conquered Al-Quds. Bayt al-Maqdis is Al-Quds. We did talk about the whole issue of Palestine, and we did mention a key thing, is that a lot of times Palestine is presented that it's a social justice issue, even though for the Yahud and for the Zionist movement, it is presented as a religious issue. And it's so sad that the Muslims do not see the game that is played on us. The Jews, the Zionists would present it as a religious issue. And if the Muslims were to present it as a religious issue, they would be told, even by the Muslims themselves, that this is a backward way of reading politics. It's quite interesting that the Zionist movement is insisting that they have the evidence to colonize Palestine that they get from the Bible. But then if we were to say, well, here's what the Quran tells us. No, you cannot use the Quran. This is extremist. This is too phonetic. This is too traditional. Why isn't it traditional when you use your Old Testament? Why isn't it phonetic when you use your Old Testament? That's basically literally ordering for the killing of pregnant women and ripping their bellies open in order to ensure that the children do not grow and basically die and kill children. And in fact, in the Old Testament, it would say, let the swords basically go through the veins of the Palestinians. This is a religious order that they would embrace. But when it comes to a Muslim, we're usually being told that this is a social justice issue. Don't get the religion involved. And the second that you would get the religion involved, you're accused of being a fanatic. You're accused of being a fundamentalist, and accused of being an extremist, etc. But then they're not talking about their fundamental ideas. So certainly, there's no way but to understand Palestine as also part of understanding the deen itself. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let us see, if you were to look at the archaeological institutes in Israel, and I will use in Israel to mean what was controlled by Israel, all right, because Palestine, this is free Palestine, that's it, all right? So when you look at وَقَدْ اسْتُخْلِفُوا فِي مِصْرَ زَمَانَ دَاوُودَ وَسُلَيْمَانَ, what the Quran introduces is that Islam is the religion of Prophet Dawood and Prophet Sulaiman anyways. In fact, even according to the Old Testament, Prophet Dawood and Sulaiman, that they were not even prophets to them, that they were kings. But as Muslims, we regard that Prophet Dawood alayhi salam is a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so is Sulaiman alayhi salam. And that they had conquered Bayt al-Maqdis, and that the whole faith that Bani Israel were on was actually Islam itself. So when he says, وَيَسْتَخْلِفَكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, this isn't talking about a race, but this is talking about the group of people, and what religion they followed was Islam. So when you talk about Palestine, it's not a social justice issue, but it's actually with an agenda to weaken the Muslims, and the best way, according to them, to weaken the Muslims is to make them believe that this is a social justice issue, meaning a national issue, meaning an area of land that basically has nothing to do with the rest of the world. It's only involving these people that are on that land. Unfortunately, even if you were to see within the Palestinian society, and mind you, I'm part Palestinian, or I should say 95%, maybe I should use that one, okay, Palestinian. And then what you see is that even within the Muslim society in Palestine, you will see when it involved Gaza, this is a Gaza matter. Now, we didn't just make it a national issue to Palestine, but no, we even localized it even more and considered this is a Gaza matter. Later on, are we going to say this is that particular family's matter and therefore it doesn't concern me? But certainly with all of that mapping and all of that is happening right now is letting us know that the Zionist movement considers that there is basically that area that they had already laid out the map for it. That's what you would find on even the map itself. Let's see the map, right? Let's look at the map and actually see what map are we talking about. This is the map right there. This is the agorot. Here's the map. Think of it as a penny, an Israeli penny. It's called basically agorot. And this agorot is basically 10 of these is 1 shekel. Okay. And this is the map at the end. Let's look at this map right there. So you're talking about areas of the Nile River all the way to the Euphrates. All the way to the Euphrates. They're announcing it right there, just on their own currency. And this isn't something that they would hide. In fact, that they would boast about it. And even the Israeli flag, the two blue lines, those 2 blue lines are the Nile River to the Euphrates. That's the announcement. Of what the plan is. So when you look at the Israeli flag, the two lines is the Nile River and the Euphrates, and that this is what marks as the Star of David and certainly Israel. So what does that mean? That's letting us know that it is basically marked on their flag, that all the area in between these two rivers is basically to be under target, All right, let's continue here. وَيَسْتَخْلِفَكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ فَيَنْظُرَ كَيْفَ تَعْمَلُونَ. As certainly Muslims, we would regard that Prophet Musa alayhi salam was Muslim, Prophet Dawood, Musa, etc. were all Muslims. So when we speak about the history of Bani Israel, we're not just talking about a history of that particular group, but we're actually talking about the history of da'wah. That's what we care about. The history of da'wah, the history of tawheed, the history of that message that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically sent. Let's see, it was narrated that they had said that when Prophet Musa alayhi salam when he had left the city where the Pharaoh is at, and then later the Pharaoh basically goes after them. He was right behind them, and the sea was in front of them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala implemented the promise that the Pharaoh was drowned, and his people were also, some were saved. Let's see. فَيَنْظُرَ كَيْفَ تَعْمَلُونَ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will test you, will see you. What will you do? After victory is another stage of question, is another stage of test. Don't get carried away with perhaps getting a degree or getting married or probably going into a stage that at one point felt like a stage of victory. But remember, this is another transition of accountability. Just keep that one in mind. It's another transition of accountability. Do not get carried away with all of that basically achievement and think I'm done. Achievement for stage one, that's one part of that achievement. The achievement in the second stage is basically now going to be فَيَنْظُرَ كَيْفَ تَعْمَلُونَ. That's going to be another accountability, another test. Let's see. وَلَقَدْ أَخَذْنَا آلَ فِرْعَوْنَ بِالسِّنِينَ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الثَّمَرَاتِ. As a result of what? Is this قالوا أذينا من قبل أن تأتينا ومن بعد ما جئتنا. Can this be a dua? Can this be a dua that they would say, Ya Allah, because in the dua, in part of the dua, there's an expression. So when you say, Allahumma rabban nas, adhib al-ba's, washfi anta shafi, the inference is, I'm feeling sick. That's the only reason why you would make that dua. If you're making the dua for rizq, I'm behind with my expenses. Or why else would you actually make that? Or you are feeling so. It may not necessarily be so. You're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant you money or give you some, I don't know, some ease in your life. What does that mean? It's basically reflecting how you feel about your situation. So this can be as part of that complaint that you would present as a dua. It is permissible. إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو بَثِّي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. I complain my sorrow, my sadness, my weakness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ وَاللَّهُ الْمُسْتَعَانِ. فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ. Why did he say فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ? Because his eyes basically lost their ability to see. He lost his sight, and with losing the sight, what happened? Well, he basically became weaker and weaker. It started with losing sight. You lose sight, you're not capable of walking as much because you're afraid of falling. You lose sight. Communication becomes a smaller area. You lose sight. Certainly, getting into a business becomes harder because your body is limited in its capacity. It's limited in what it can do. And if you see somebody that is disabled, whether they're blind or whether they're probably having a disability in any shape or form, just keep that one in mind. When you give a gift, make sure you give a gift of what they're capable of using. I don't mean giving, for somebody that is lame, probably giving them a bicycle. That's not what I mean. My recommendation, if you're dealing with a disabled person, my recommendation is give them money. Let them figure out their priorities. I'm not talking about, like I said, buying, rollerblades for somebody that is probably lame or has a broken or disabled broken leg or something like that. But I'm just talking about different kinds of disabilities. Make sure that you also support those with disabilities. You'll be surprised how much help it costs them. You'll be surprised the amount of kasr nafs, of how they would be so broken to even ask for help. Their dignity is always a price that they get so used to paying. Their dignity is always something that they learn how to become thick-skinned. That's a form of bullying that they go through. At the end of the day, when he says, وَلَقَدْ أَخَذْنَا آلَ فِرْعَوْنَ بِالسِّنِينَ وَنَقَصٍ مِنَ الثَّمَرَاتِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَذَّكَّرُونَ. And verily, we had taken the Pharaoh. Bis-sinin. What is a sinin? A sinin is not years at all. A sinin is drought. When you say أصابتهم سنة, that they were pricked or they were inflicted with sana. Sana is drought. When you say a year of drought, you would look at losing not just food items. Rain doesn't just bring the greenery. It looks like we had been so used to living indoors that we stopped recognizing the impact that outdoors have on us. Less rain simply means less food, less jobs, less going out, less certainly being able to survive, less money, less resources on all ends, less fresh air. And certainly that will affect what actually makes you function as a human being. So here's a question. If they had said, أُوذِنَا مِنْ قَبْلِ أَنْ تَأْتِينَا وَمِنْ بَعْدِ مَا جِئْتَنَا, as a way, we want to assume that it's to make dua. Is it permissible to make dua against the kuffar? And I don't mean a dua that is making Allah yahdihum. But no, we're going to go fiercer and actually make a dua to destruct, to inflict pain on such people that had caused harm. Is this permissible? Let's say, in order to say something is ethical or not, we would have to see whether the Prophet ﷺ had done it or not. Because otherwise, it's so easy to fall within a pacifist mindset, thinking that Islam is a pacifist religion and that we're just supposed to be nice. I want you to be careful. Yes, Definitely. We're not telling you to be mean. We're not telling you to be rude, but we're telling you that being nice should not be at the expense of your dignity. Being supportive should not be at the expense of your security. Never should your security or your dignity be a price that you pay for a little trade, which is at least they're including me. At least they're being tolerant, because guess what? It's not going to end there. Your next price is going to be not your personal dignity, it's going to be your faith. If you become an easy person that's willing to give up their security, willing to give up their dignity, your faith is going to be next. You give up on your faith, or your security will be at risk. So that's why Islam was always letting us know, do not give yourself for this exaggerated type of niceness. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يَسْتَخِفَنَّكَ الَّذِينَ لَا يُوقِنُونَ. Don't let those that do not have yaqeen take advantage of you or see you as khafif, like you do not have weight. Gotta be strong. It shouldn't be something that you would trade. You have the right to security. You have the right to respect. You have your dignity, the right to get respected. And you do not have to pay in all these services in order to gain it. But this is a legal maxim that you have. The right to be entitled to. But you have to work hard for it. And you have to be wise in how you practice it. So Islam is not a pacifist religion. That's one thing. Let's see, the Prophet ﷺ, he made the dua, Allahumma ja'alha alayhim sinina ka siniyi Yusuf. Ya Allah, let their years be like the years of Prophet Yusuf. What type of sini and kasini? What does this mean? When did he make this dua? That's why it would be really important to actually go to these hadith and actually see when was it that the Prophet ﷺ made this dua. We can see that this hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim. To define ethics, I don't use the liberal parameters, and I do not use the parameters that are laid out by certain groups of people or certain philosophers to tell me that this is what it means to be good. No, I go back to Quran and Sunnah to help me understand the parameters of what it means to be good, what it means to not pay the price and trade your deen and your security and your honor for some kind of rhetoric of, yes, we're going to tolerate you. Some kind of a rhetoric, we're going to give you little pieces of trade. And then many, and this is very common, that we would see that people thinking that once they might get some scraps of privileges, that, oh, we're so lucky. And a lot of activists fall for that. A lot of activists fall for that. They will basically be given certain opportunities to get a job, grant, to open up an organization. The list goes on in different opportunities that will, or certain offers. And they will think of it that it's actually working. No one gives you money for free. There's no way. No one is going to give you money for free to open up your Islamic organization. But once you started taking that grant, then I would know that someone else is laying an agenda and letting you know, here's what this money was given to you for. This is what I expect from you. Same thing. You are given probably a job offer. You are given a certain privilege. It doesn't go for free. There's a reason to it. What is that trade-off? Islam lets you know, never make that trade-off be your deen. Never is that your life, and certainly never is it your mental health, and never is it your chastity. Never accept that somebody would somehow molest or commit zina. Never do you sell your ird. Never do you sell any of that. The trade is to be an equal and fair trade, but never put your deen as what you trade in. Never. And that's why for a mu'min, that's the key faith. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. No matter what it is. Never accept people to give you certain presented privileges. It is presented as privileges, and many activists would fall for it. They are giving us a space to open up masajid here and there. They're giving us space to wear our hijab here and there, but then they would prevent you from speaking about Islam, from defending Islam, from a lot of these different things. Then, oh, you thought that that was a privilege to give you some spaces? Guess what? The next step is taking out. When you become weak, that's their next agenda, which is to take out even your deen and even your hijab. So you need to be really careful. You need to be really careful before you would consider that I made it. You need to make sure that you recognize, made what? You made it into what? You made it into believing that you had the privilege. That's what they had the objective to make you believe, and you fell for it. Be careful with that one. Yes, at least I get healthcare. At least I get this and this. And then certainly they would think, I got some of these privileges. Now I have to be silent. Speak the truth. Speak of Islam. Speak of justice. The way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you to speak it. The way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked you to defend it. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, right there, what was the story behind all of this? The story behind this was that Mudar, what happened? They basically had come to the Prophet ﷺ, and they had asked that the Prophet ﷺ would send correspondents, teachers, to their city in order to teach them Islam. The Prophet ﷺ kept on telling them that he's concerned for their safety, doesn't feel safe doing that, and then they promised that they will be secure and that nothing will happen to them. The Prophet ﷺ believed it. He did send a group of Sahaba, almost 40. And then in the middle of the way, they surrounded them and killed them. And they were some of the most educated Sahaba. One of them they thought was killed, but he was in his last breath. A group of Sahaba were passing by and see them on the ground, just a massacre right there. And then the one that was still alive, he passed on the information to say, this is what had happened. And then died. The Prophet ﷺ makes this dua on those that had committed this. اللهم اشدد وطأتك على مضر واجعلها عليهم سنين كسني يوسف. Ya Allah, have your power on Mudar and let their years be like the years of drought that happened on the time during the time of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. You could see this hadith is narrated by Bukhari and Muslim. If the Prophet ﷺ can make this dua, that would actually mean to make dua against I don't know, Netanyahu or Trump or whatever, all these pedophiles out there, that's a sunnah. And to think that, no, I just want to be nice. Sorry, not at the expense of our deen. To be nice is to bring security, is to bring support, is to end basically those that had become al-a'da, those that had become enemies. You know, it's exactly like somebody saying, you know, we don't want to be mean and let the police officers carry grenades and guns and handcuffs. Let's be nice and give them, instead of that, let's give them cookies and let's give them maybe perfume and maybe give them, instead of microphones, to say, you know, come out with your hands up. Maybe we can say something like, are you okay? Would you want to talk about it? It's like, seriously? Just imagine. Would you want to talk about it, right? No, that doesn't work. And we have to recognize reality, especially in areas of women. Many times they just think, no, I can't handle this. This is too mean. My dear, أو ما ينشأ في الحلية وهو في الخصام غير مبين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the people, the groups, the women that are brought up in al-hilya, in areas of cosmetics and looking good, but you know, just worried and concerned about their appearance, is not equal to a person that is in al-khisam. It's not equal. In times of battle, in times of division, in times of war, that they would not be capable of coming. Why? Because if you're really prepared for a battle, you're not supposed to be concerned about your appearance, dear. And that's the same thing. When you look at our daughter situations, our boys' situation right now, concerned about their eyebrows, their appearance, and what girls think and what boys think, and concerned about their appearance and all that gel, that tells me that this person is no way prepared to fight for the ummah. No way prepared to fight. And I don't necessarily mean fighting in battle, but I would mean concerned with their focus to make sure that the ummah and that the situation of leadership requires that we need strong men and strong women, because the trouble, the challenge, the crisis is real. If the kuffar are training themselves, all that training in order to support episteme groups, but then the people on haqq, they're being told, oh, you will appear too scary that way. You have to make sure that you are presentable as a nice Muslim. And then we believed it, we fell for it, that we have to make sure that we're presenting ourselves as cute. We've got a problem with these cute appearances, because a cute appearance is going to also mean an inside that is empty of all power, confidence, azima. We got a problem. We got a problem. Okay, let's continue right there. Sinin, what is sinin? We said it's a plural of sana. And sana basically means we're talking about drought. And here he made it really clear, لا بمعنى الحول, not to mean that this is years. He made it really clear. This isn't talking about أخذنا فرعون بالسنين. This isn't talking about many years had passed. No, this has nothing to do with many years passing. Sinin here, this word right there, sinin, this means drought and not years. Okay? لعلهم يذكرون. Why لعلهم يذكرون? Meaning that this was in order to bring about a warning. What does a warning look like? A warning can be presented as a way of a reminder. A reminder can be, hey, remember what we had told you, foretold you that this was going to bring about a crisis, that this was going to bring about a challenge. So now you see it. If the trajectory of what you're doing is bringing you harm, that's to let you know that the start in the beginning and the path that you were going through was wrong from the start. If you're looking at the goal that you're supposed to get to and the trajectory that it led you in, that's simple, straightforward physics. The trajectory that you went to, which is this drought, that's basically to let you know that there is something that you had done wrong and that it needs to be reviewed. And therefore, to recognize ethics, to recognize wrong paths by recognizing where you're at and what your life turned into. That's basically لعلهم يذكرون. That's a reminder for you to review all the different things that you had committed. What you are probably doing needs complete and a total transformation. May need a total transformation. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting them know لعلهم يذكرون, that this may actually require a total transformation, and therefore let them see that لعلهم يذكرون as another form of that reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may break certain whether we're speaking about a curse, drought, or pain, or to inflict them with pain, all these different things, was one, to give them another opportunity to recognize the trajectory of what they had committed. Two, to basically let them turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because people will turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when they are in a moment of sorrow, when they're in a moment of feeling hopeless or helpless. That's when they turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as their final destination. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was squeezing them as لَعَلَّهُمْ يَذَّكَّرُونَ. Is this لَعَلَّ to mean possibly? Did not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already know that they were not going to get into a tadhkira? Or what was that meaning? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already knows what choices they were going to make. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting them know that they were given different forms of warning for doing what? يَذَّكَّرُونَ. What is يَذَّكَّر? يَذَّكَّر can mean to remember, can mean to mention, because it's the root. The root is ذَكَّرَ, and can also mean, we're talking about remembering, recalling, and could also mean to repeat something. So ذَكَرَ, to utter, and يَتَذَكَّر, to repeat, whether we're talking about to remember, to repeat something, recall, in repeating perhaps the circumstance and what happened in order to bring about your memory and bring it back, or something to basically remind you of it, etc. So we're looking at لَعَلَّهُمْ يَذَّكَّرُونَ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to bring an awakening to them. What awakening? The awakening of their fitrah. The awakening of their fitrah. And that's why, like I always say, prisons are the best areas for da'wah. Because they recognize what they had committed. Now they're feeling helpless, hopeless, and now they're feeling everything's closed down on them. So at that moment, their fitrah is ready to embrace any da'wah you might give them. Why? Because they're feeling so hopeless, so helpless, and the entertainment is not available, distractions are not available. Now they're ready with their fitrah to basically look for any da'wah, any word of haqq that you might say. فإذا جاءتهم قالوا لنا هذه وإن تصبهم سيئة يطيروا بموسى ومن معه ألا إنما طائرهم عند الله ولكن أكثرهم لا يعلمون. I'm going to stop right here. Inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow. Right? We'll continue, inshallah, tomorrow, because you could see al-Qurtubi said that there are two different matters to discuss here. And today is a Monday for me and a Sunday for you. And I thought it would be a good idea to stop right here. That way we can go in thorough explanation for this ayah, especially that there are two different matters to say, and you can see these two different matters. They basically have a lot of ahadith, a lot of ayah till we get to the following ayah. So I wanted to make sure that the ideas stay coherent. So we'll continue tomorrow, inshallah, on this ayah. If there are any questions, go ahead, my friends. If there are any questions, inshallah, you can unmute yourselves if you would like. All right, my friends, here's what I'll do. I will take out